Fishing with a bobber is easy and incredibly effective. We're going to talk about types of bobbers, how to set up a bobber, and how to fish with them. Bobbers come in all kinds of sizes and styles. The most common for beginners is the round bobber shaped like a small plastic ball. To attach this to your line, you push the stem in, and that pops a hook out the other side. Put your line under this hook and let it go. Now push on just the edge of the stem, and it lets another hook pop out. Put your line under that one too. If you find that your bobber is slipping on your line, wrap it once around the hook to keep it in place. It really doesn't matter which side of the bobber faces up, but I generally put the stem side facing down into the water. A quieter and more durable type of bobber is the taller spring bobber, often called a float. These can be made from plastic, foam, or balsa wood. They're very visible and they're easier to see when there are waves on the surface of the water. To attach it to your line, you pull the spring down to expose a notch in the stem, and then put your line through that notch. Let the spring go, and now your bobber's on the line. Again, you can wrap your line once around the notch if you find that it's sliding on your line. You can also add a small sinker to your line, or don't. That's up to you, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The last type is the slip bobber. Slip bobbers have the line running directly through the bobber, and they're great for fishing in deep water. If you wanted to fish 8 feet down with a spring bobber, it would be extremely hard to cast because you would need to have at least 8 feet of line out during your cast, and the bobber and hook will spin around in the air during the cast and often get tangled. It's also hard to accurately cast your bait when so much line is spinning around in the air. A slip bobber sits close to your bait during the cast and allows for more accurate placement of your bait. Once a slip bobber hits the water, it allows your line to slide down through it until the bobber stop touches the bobber. This bobber stop can be set at any depth, and it can be reeled through the guides on your rod and even into your reel if needed. Bobber stops can be rubbery or made from thread, and both work well. To set up a slip bobber, you first run your line through a bobber stop, then run it through a plastic bead, then through the top of your bobber and out the bottom. Then in most cases you'll need to add a small split shot sinker or a swivel to add a little bit of weight and keep the jig or hook from getting jammed in the bottom of your slip bobber, and then finally tie on your hook or jig. Slip bobbers are more complicated to set up than the other types of bobbers, but they're much more effective for things like catching suspended crappies or walleyes over deep structure. Bobbers are most often used with a worm for bluegills and panfish, but a bobber can be used with minnows or jigs for crappies, bass, and walleyes, and it's a popular way to suspend fish eggs or spawn sacks for big salmon, or float suckers for big muskies. With a spring bobber or traditional round bobber, a sinker can help you cast farther or can help get your bait down to the desired depth more quickly. Adding some weight can also make the bobber sit down lower in the water and require less effort by the fish to pull it under. The downside to a sinker is that it can make more noise when you cast, and it makes the bait fall at a very unnatural speed. On a day when the fish are less active, they'll often bite better if the bait falls at a slower speed, so in this case you're better off not using a sinker, or at least positioning the sinker far away from your bait. If you're fishing with a worm, a common mistake is to put a whole worm on the hook. You only need to use a small piece of a worm. Anything left hanging off will probably be pecked off by the fish before they actually bite your hook. You're basically just feeding the fish, and you'll probably get frustrated that you can't ever hook one when you're clearly getting bites. You can break a worm with your fingernail or just use a knife to cut it. The best places to cast a bobber with a worm, minnow, or a jig are around sparse vegetation, around docks, brush piles, or wood in the water, or in eddies. An eddy is an area of slow-moving water on the edge of current. Fish will often sit here because they don't have to swim against the current, but they can still watch for food going by. If your bobber sits for a while without a bite, give it a few small twitches. This movement of the bobber and your bait can attract fish in and give you a better chance of getting a bite. Good luck bobber fishing, and thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.